Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James and welcome back to our Unity Simple Simon mobile app game development tutorial series. So we've set up the game so that we can randomly make a light appear, and then we've set a way to check that the player is pressing the right light at the right time. So what we need to do right now is add the ability for our game to create a sequence of lights for our player to try and replicate. That gets harder and harder as you go because more and more are added on. So to do that, we're obviously going to need to make changes to our game manager script. So we're going to open this up here. I have it open. There we go. So at the moment, all we have in here is we have a selection of the colors which are available, or the colored buttons which are available basically. We have a value that will randomly pick the button to light up, and then we have a little counter thing that keeps track of how long the light should stay lit for, and then once it stops being lit, then we turn it off. So what we're going to do is add a few more things here that are going to be useful to us. So if we have our lights lighting up, and say we have a sequence of 5 colors, what we obviously want to do is make it have a certain amount of time that it stays lit for, but we'll need a little pause between each light so that it will kind of wait to get to the next one and then start going. So we're going to add a new public float that we'll call wait between lights, and we're also going to add a private float that we'll call wait between counter, which is much like we did with the stay lit here. That our wait between counter is what we'll use to keep track of the value in between, and we use wait between lights to reset the value. So we encountered last time a little problem, which was that when our player was pressing any buttons that has already been selected, the light was being turned off, or not turned off, but it was being permanently set to be halfway because of our little else statement here. So what we're going to need to use to kind of combat that is a couple of bool values, which will determine, okay, should it not just control if our counter is above 0 and then we count down, and then if we get to an else statement and it's not, so then it's always setting this to be false. What we can do is say, if we have a bool value that is true for us being lit up as we count down, once we get below 0, what we can do is say, okay, now that we're below 0, set it back to its kind of dim value, and then we'll turn the bool to be false, so we're no longer interacting with this. So to handle that, we'll just do that quickly. We'll just add a private bool that we'll call should be lit, and we'll also do a private bool for should be dark, just like that, just to keep it nice and simple. So we'll actually do that first here. We'll kind of rewrite this little bit of code so that it makes a little bit more sense. So now we're going to check, rather than if the counter is above 0, what we're going to do is check if should be lit is true. And then down in our start function, we're going to make sure that should be lit is true straight away. And then, so should be lit is true, and we'll start counting down time. We're going to get rid of this else statement and these open and close brackets, because what we're going to add is a new if statement saying if our stay lit counter is below 0, then we want to run this little bit of code there, and we put a close curly bracket. And what we also want to do is say should be lit is equal to false. Okay, so that's the kind of basics of that little bit here. So say, for example, although we haven't set up the sequence yet, what we would do then, it would be to activate our wait between counter. So we won't set that up just yet. We will return to that in a little bit. But as you can see, that's a kind of a more simple way. And actually, if we go back and test that in the game now, what we should see is we no longer end up with the situation where one of the lights can't be pressed. So if we hit play, the problem we had last time was immediately the red button couldn't be pressed because it starts at the default value of 0. But now we can press all the buttons as much as we want to press them. Okay, so now that we have that kind of little error kind of thing fixed, let's start looking at how we do our actual sequence. So if we're going to have a sequence, we'll obviously need to keep track of what numbers are being selected in our sequence. And every time the player completes the sequence, we add a new number onto the end and make it play through the whole sequence again. So to do that, what we're going to use is a list. So we're going to say public list, and we're going to make not an I list. Oh, sorry, I just remembered we actually need to add an extra thing up here. So where we have using Unity Engine and using system.collections, to use lists we have to use type using system.collections.generic. So then down here we can say public list, and then inside a sharp bracket we'll say int, like that, and then what we're going to call it is active sequence. So a list, it's not something we've covered on the channel before, so I'll just kind of briefly run through it. A list is essentially and kind of functionally very similar to an array, but it's a little bit more easy to manipulate. It's really easy to add things to it and remove things from it and stuff like that, whereas an array is kind of a little bit more awkward to remove and add things to. So we've used an array for our colors up here because if we go to our script, these 6 buttons aren't going anywhere. We're going to be using them the whole time, whereas our list is going to keep changing up and down and going to different values along the way. So that's why we want to use a list to record what's in the sequence at the moment. And say, for example, if we have a list that is five values long, because we're using an int value because it's just a basic number, and we're going to use the same color select principle of setting those values, so it'll still be between 0 and 5 all the way. But say our list is 5 pieces long, or it could be 37 pieces long, who knows. We obviously want to keep track of where we are in that sequence for lighting up our buttons. So let's use a private int that we will call our position in sequence, like that. Okay, so now we've kind of got all the basic elements here that we're actually going to use for our sequence of lights. So let's kind of look at how we're attacking things from the start here. So in our start function, what we can do is say, rather than just having our color selecting at the start here, what we want to do is, if we're going to have a sequence, we obviously need to set our position in our sequence to be 0 to start off with, because say if we're in the middle of our game and we're jumping back to this, we need to make sure we're at the start of the sequence always. So we'll just make sure that this is 0, like that. So then we have our color select being selected, but what we want to do is actually get our active sequence and say, so that's our list of numbers that we have. So what we're going to say is active sequence dot add, like that, and what we're going to add to it is whatever random number has just been selected. There, like that. So we have our random number selected, and then we're going to add that to our list. So we'll actually just, before we start doing anything else, we'll just save this and see how that works. So if we go back here and let that compile for a second, we'll highlight our colors. So we have our active sequence here, and if we drop this down, we can see its size is 0, so we could manipulate this to be, its size could be 35 or something if we wanted, like that, and it just jumps out, but we'll leave it at size 0. And what we'll do is, if we play the game, now we should see that we're going to add a value to that list. So if we hit start, well, it just happened to add 0 to the list, but let's just see, we can keep clicking it and it starts messing things up here, but that's okay, we'll sort all that out in a little bit. But we can see it keeps adding a new number to the list every single time, just the way we want it to. Okay, so what we can do then, now that we have that working, instead of our colors.color being just based off the color select, what we want to do is, because we're going to reuse this again as we move forward to a script, instead of being color select here, we're going to go into the active sequence, and we're going to take whatever value we're currently at in the sequence. So we know we're using our position in sequence to keep track of it. So we can say in the active sequence, get whatever value is in the position in sequence. So that's 0 at the moment. So say we bump this up to 5 just here for a second. So say we start out at position 0, so it'll go, okay, position in sequence is at 0, so we'll go to there, look in the active sequence, and we find that value is, oh, at the moment they're all zeros, but so say if our position in sequence is up to 3, then here it would go, okay, go into the active sequence, find number 3, and then we'd find whatever value is there, like that. So we're just going to replace this value in for everywhere we have color select here. So we'll go like that there, and then clicked on the wrong button there for a second, or wrong part there for a second, but there we go, we got all of them filled in there, and we're going to use this to overwrite where we have it up above as well. So we'll copy this whole line and we're going to paste it in over this colors here, and then at the end of that line, of course, we need to make sure that this is being reset back to be 0.5f. So that's perfect, and that's pretty much all the change we need to make to the start of our sequence here. So now what we can do up here is say, okay, our first light is being lit up. Then after the light has been turned off, we will set should be dark to be true, so that we're looking at the pause between stuff here. So should be dark is equal, I didn't do that right at all. Should be dark is equal to true is what we should put there. And we will want to use a timer to count down again. So we're going to use our wait between counter is equal to wait between lights. Okay, so now that we've set that, below our if should be lit statement, we're going to add a new if statement for should be dark. And then in here, we're going to do something very similar to what we had up above, which is we're going to make it count down straight away. So it'll be wait between counter minus equals time dot delta time, like that. And the first thing we want to do is check if we're at the end of the sequence. So what we can do is say if our position in sequence, so the value that we're using for our position, if that is oh wait, sorry, no, what we actually want to do is as soon as the button that's lit up, as soon as that goes dark, we want to move our position in the sequence forward one place so that we're not just stuck in the same place the whole time. So we need to add in just here, just to say position in sequence plus plus, so it just adds 1 onto it, and then this thing will stop running, so it won't add more than 1 at any point there. So now we're checking if our position in sequence, if that is greater than or equal to our active sequence, so that's our list here, the active sequence dot not length, sorry, dot count. And dot count is the same as we have array.length to check how many items are in an array, and we use a list.count to count how many items are here. So we'll use a close bracket there then. So what we're doing is saying, so our position in sequence, is that number greater than or equal to our active sequence? So say for example, we've got a sequence here, and if we get to 4, it'll light up the last button in the sequence. And then once that finishes lighting up, it'll add 1 onto it, so it becomes 5. And then at that point, it's equal to the size of the list here. So if that's true, then it won't do. It'll basically run whatever we put within here. So basically, what we're saying is, if the sequence is at the end of the sequence, then we need to stop doing stuff. We need to say our lights active. No, sorry, that's not the right thing. Our should be dark, that's what we're talking about. Our should be dark is equal to false. I was thinking of something else altogether there for a second. So what we're saying is that at this point, okay, stop running the should be dark thing, because there's nothing else to do. We've reached the end of the sequence, there's nothing else we need to do here. But if that isn't true, there is some things we need to do. So we're going to add an else statement here, like this. and we're going to say, okay, if that's not true, if we haven't reached the end of the sequence, what we can do then is check if our counter is below 0. So if weight between counter is less than 0, then we want to move on to the next light in the sequence. So we know we've already added 1 to our position in the sequence. So here we can say, okay, if that's okay, we need to randomly pick a new color again, much like we did down here. We can actually just copy pretty much all of this code here, because we're going to do the exact same thing again. We're just going to randomly pick our color. We're going to add it to the sequence. We're going to make sure that color is lit up. And we're going to start our counter counting down again. And our should be lit is also true, so that our counter is able to count down. And that's pretty much all we need to do here. So if we save this now and go back into the game, let that all compile for a second, and we'll make sure our active sequence is back to being 0. So now if we hit play, so now our start game function is actually running a little bit differently, because what it's doing is adding something to our sequence, because we don't have the touch control, or not the touch, but our player clicking on the buttons. That isn't verifying the whole list yet, because that's something we'll cover in the next episode. But for now, what we have it doing is adding 1 onto the sequence. So first of all, there we go, we got a purple. Okay, we reached the end of playing, it's done. So if we hit start game again, oh, we got a whole bunch of things being created. That's something's wrong there. Oh, of course, because we're not turning our should be dark off. We need to make sure that we turn that off as soon as we set a new light to be going. We need to make sure that our should be dark is turned off, or else it's going to keep adding numbers to the sequence forever and ever. And obviously that isn't what we want to happen. But you saw there what happened was, before it started going crazy, it actually started just playing from the first part of the sequence again, just the way we wanted to. So let's hit play again, and this time it should work just perfectly for us. So we hit play. So we start a game. We got a yellow. Select it straight away. Run again. We got yellow, then purple. It's adding things on repeatedly. That is not right. Okay, I just realized what was going on here. It was a very simple little mistake. We're not supposed to add a new selection here. We're only supposed to add, at the moment, all we want to do is add a new number to the sequence when we press our new game button, because that's, as I said, when our player, we don't have a way of verifying the player's input against the whole sequence yet. So that would be where we would normally add a new element to the sequence. But at the moment, all we want to do is actually just light up the next number in the sequence and then go back to being stay lit and such like that. So we actually get rid of both of those lines there, because we don't need to randomly pick a new color if we're just going to whatever color is in the sequence. So if we just save this and go back into the game here, once that compiles down in the corner, we should see that it will work perfectly fine. There was no need to add. We only want to add to the sequence when you press start game for now. Although in the actual game itself, we won't actually want that to function like that. Our start game will actually completely erase the whole sequence. But if we hit start game again, okay, we just happened to get 2 purples there, so that didn't really help us. But we just got 3 purples. There we go, we got another color. And the reason they're staying lit is because, of course, we didn't actually change I turned this back to normal view. We didn't change our weight between lights, so we'll set that to be just a quarter of a second, so there's a little flash in between each one. So now, once we run, we start the game, do it again, we get orange, and then we get green, then we get orange, green, green. There we go. So we got a little flash between the 2 different colors there. And now you can see our sequence is building. So what would ideally happen is that our player would get the sequence correct, and then it will add the new number to the sequence rather than us pressing start game every time. So we need to add a way to check through the whole sequence when our player touches each individual one of these buttons. So let's take a look at doing that in the next episode. Thanks for checking out this episode, and if you want even more Games Plus James goodness, make sure you hit those subscribe and like buttons. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook by following the links on screen, where you can find out all the latest news about the channel. And if you want to help support the show, check out the Patreon page, where you can get exclusive content in return for helping make the channel even better. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.